Got anything in my teeth? And good evening, and welcome to An Hour with the Candidates. My name is Pat Ford. I currently serve as chair of the Libertarian Party of Rhode Island, and I serve as an alternate for Region 8 for the Libertarian National Committee. First off, as always, I'd like to thank Dan Fishman, Executive Director of the Libertarian Party, and also Executive Producer of this effort. And a shout out, of course, to Nick Sarwak, who's helped make this possible. I want to set a challenge. It is my goal before the end of November to somehow, whether it be here or elsewhere, have an opportunity to speak to literally every Libertarian Party down candidate in this country. I salute the candidate. I believe that candidacies, if you will, particularly for independent parties, are amongst the most patriotic things you can do for your nation, your community, and actually for yourself. The sacrifice that folks take, financial, time with their family, time away from their career, to advance the cause of liberty is perhaps one of the most noble challenges we face as individuals. With that in mind, there are a few purposes of the show. We want to give the libertarian community an opportunity to meet wonderful down-ballot candidates, and we want to challenge them to incorporate lunch pail voter issues, you'll hear me use that term a lot, through the prism of a libertarian perspective. So with that in mind, I'd like to introduce someone to the show, Eric Mulder. He is running to be the Regional Transportation District, District F, which incorporates largely the city of Aurora, Colorado. Eric, welcome to An Hour with the Candidates.
Hey, Pat. Thanks for having me.
It's good to see you again, buddy. I think the last time we saw each other was in Reno, and we had a great time, a great conversation there. And that's when you first told me about, your goal, if you will, to get this position. Tell us a little bit about, first off, how Colorado as a state governs, if you will, mass transportation. I just want to reflect on the East Coast, you've typically got statewide independent quasi-public agencies / corporations that often grow into vast bureaucracies and typically are more focused on growing the bureaucracies than sometimes, if you will, delivering the fundamental services of mass transportation. How do they run the show in Colorado?
All right, Pat. So mass transit in Colorado is absolutely very unique in the way it's overrun. You've got the city of Colorado Springs, which pretty much maintains its own transportation system, but in the large metro corridor footprint, which is Denver, Boulder, Aurora, and parts of Douglas County and Castle Rock going into the south, you have what's called the Regional Transportation District, which is an amalgamation of many former transportation agencies that have been merged and rolled into one. It's an absolutely large agency that oversees not only the bus operations within the 8-county footprint of RTD, it also oversees the light rail operations throughout the RTD region as well. And if RTD itself were a city in Colorado, it would have the 4th largest budget within the entire state. And in fact, RTD is actually home to the highest paid government official in the state of Colorado, which is the RTD CEO / general manager. They are the highest paid government official within the state. They make more than the governor. They make more than the mayor of Denver. It's the highest paid position in the state.
What type of budget are we talking about?
So RTD's specific operating budget is somewhere in the ballpark of about $682 million. But when rolled in with the other expenses and things of that nature, you're looking at almost up to $2 billion, give or take. So you're looking at a very serious budget when you're talking about government budgets within the state of Colorado.
So this is governed individually. You have a board, and essentially you're competing to be elected to that board of that agency.
Yep, that is correct. The RTD board is made up of 15 different representatives who all have a regional footprint. There's no at-large positions. It's a regional district that's assigned a letter A through O. So all 15 districts have at least one representative. And each district is roughly divided by population. So you'll have districts that are ranging of about 150,000 constituents each. And of that 150,000, some aren't registered to vote, some aren't children, things of that nature. But generally speaking, you've got about 150,000 people per district, and you've got anywhere from 50 to 60,000 of those people voting in even yeared elections. So every even numbered years, some of the RTD board seats are going to be up, and then the other half will be up in other even numbered years. So the entire board doesn't get replaced in one sitting.
Excellent. So, and you're running for District F, which, as I mentioned in the run-up to the show, includes is primarily Aurora, Colorado. Now, what are the responsibilities? I mean, is it budgets? Do you set fares? How much of a deep dive do you do into the day-to-day operations of the authority?
Well, RTD's general operations are split among the board of directors and the RTD staff. The RTD staff, to include the general manager, are the ones who set the day-to-day policy of RTD, but it's the RTD board of directors who set the fares and set the general policy in a more broad context. So it's not the day-to-day operations that the board oversees. It's more general policy, things like the fares, things of that nature. So it's a part-time position. So you'll absolutely not be quitting your day job if you're going to be running for the RTD board. It pays about $1,000 a month plus a rider's pass. So it's definitely a issue of civic duty, like you mentioned earlier, where you got to really have a passion to do what you want to do in order to go for it, because it's definitely not something that people are going to do to pay their bills.
Now, I got to ask you, how often do you take the, as we would call it in New England and Boston, we call it the T. How often do you take the T or the bus or use light rail?
Well, when I was a student at Rocky Mountain College of Art and Design, I would take the bus or light rail, sometimes anywhere from 2 to 3 times a week. I wouldn't be on campus every single day because I would have sometimes online classes. But with not only graduation, but what occurred with the COVID-19 pandemic, my ridership has pretty much stopped entirely right now. So at the moment, I'm currently not riding, as are lots of people. RTD ridership had been on the decline for years, and the COVID-19 pandemic pretty much brought a lot of that down even further.
All right, so we're going to talk in a couple of minutes about some of the challenges you're facing during COVID, but in the time leading up to COVID, who was a typical rider? Now you talk about colleges. Is Aurora a college town, or does it lead into the grid where folks are attending day school?
Aurora absolutely does have a college presence. We have the Community College of Aurora, which is a fantastic educational university. They have student programs where they've built robots that have been sent into space. So Community College Aurora is one of the best colleges that we've got in the city of Aurora. But it also feeds into the Denver metro area, where you have riders who go to the University of Colorado Denver campus, Metro State University in Denver, Colorado. And you also have the Rocky Mountain College of Art and Design, which is just right outside the city of Denver and Lakewood. And in terms of ridership makeup in RTD, the latest statistics have shown that RTD riders are pretty diverse overall. Approximately 1/3 are what's called transit dependent, meaning they don't have their own independent transportation and rely exclusively on mass transit to get where they need to go. Then you have another third who are sort of a hybrid, where you have people who have transit, but for whatever reason, it's not a typical viable option for them to use in their daily use. And then you also have riders who are essentially recreational riders. They'll use the transit to get to football games, get to major games in the Denver area, and they'll use it basically on weekends and for getaways.
Interesting. Now, what's the fare structure like? Is it a type of fare where there's overall generic fares, or are they really broken down in terms of how many stops, interoperability within different districts?
So ultimately, there's a couple of fare different options in RTD. The most common is to get a couple of hours for a single pass, and that will get you onto the bus, and that'll get you onto the bus again within a very short time frame. And one of the biggest challenges we have in RTD is that option, which is the most common option, is the most expensive in the country. We we pay more for these single fares than any other rider in the country pays for their fares. We pay more than New York. We pay more than San Francisco for those types of fares.
Wow.
The other structure that's less common is also the monthly and yearly riders passes. When I was a college student, I had what was called a student pass, where as part of my tuition, that would cover a rider's pass that would get me basically unlimited access.
So in terms of these high costs, what's the driving factor? Is it bonding costs, debt service, equipment maintenance? What's making it the most expensive facility like it in the nation?
The most expensive fares that we have right now in the country have been primarily motivated by the fact that ridership has been declining, and fares represent about 15% of RTD's overall operating budget. The majority comes from sales tax revenue and then followed by grants, both state and federal. Then at about 15%, you also have fares. And because ridership has been declining, that saw the amount of fares declining. So RTD has been ratcheting up the fare prices consistently for the past couple of years while ridership continues to decline. And as libertarians, we say this sounds kind of counterintuitive to market-based principles, where you have to give a product that meets the demand of consumers in order for your product to see improvement.
How much of a hot button issue, a hot potato, a political football is in fact ridership? And do you find different parts of the community advocating for improved facilities, particularly say in the urban core?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. If you get into the city of Denver proper, you will see that there is a tremendous demand for fare reform. No one in the city of Denver is particularly happy with the price they're paying for fares, and riders out to the city of Aurora and even the outlying areas are unhappy with the fare amounts. And RTD staff has conducted surveys of transit-dependent riders, and even some of them have said if fares continue to raise, they will not use mass transit. And what you see is continued ridership decline, and that is basically a vicious cycle where RTD raises the fares and less riders ride, and the less riders who ride, the less you're going to get from fares.
Right. Of course. Is it expensive to own an automobile in Aurora or the greater Denver area?
I would say, as somebody who has purchased his second car because his first one went out, it absolutely can be a financial struggle, especially if you find yourself in a situation where you didn't have someone go with you to the dealer and you ended up in a deal that's cost you an arm and a leg. The price of car insurance is absolutely expensive. And then you also have the upkeep on the vehicle. I've put off a lot of upkeep on my own car. It still runs and it's still very much functional, but there's a lot of maintenance I've put off simply because it's one of those things that it's a continuous thing. Like I said, I've previously owned a car, paid it off the first time, so I know how expensive it absolutely can be to try to pay that off. So I know for a lot of people, car ownership is not within their immediate financial capacity.
So here's the fundamental challenge as I see it as a libertarian. In the state of Colorado, you're using a variety of indirect taxes to support an organization that's being used less and less frequently. And very often there is no relationship at all between some of the taxes being generated and the subsidies for this municipal grand statewide transportation authority. So you're in that vicious cycle that so many systems are. People love the convenience of automobiles. They can't afford it. And the working poor in particular are driven to mass transportation, but in so many places around the country, it doesn't serve their scheduling needs. It doesn't serve their lives. So at what point do you think you begin to move the people of Colorado towards a competitive free market model where independent transportation is encouraged? Are there right now independent bus services? Is there any sort of, other than say the traditional taxi cab, medallion fare, or ride sharing services, is there any other for-profit independent entities competing in the space?
Inside the footprint of RTD, we do not see such competition very frequently, but what we do see is that in municipalities that aren't serviced by RTD, if they have a mass transit system, it's their own. The city of Colorado Springs has an entirely separate mass transit system that has nothing to do with RTD and isn't funded from the same channels as RTD. And what I've even seen from city council members who are even identifying with left-leaning political ideologies is that they have said RTD is a gargantuan, Herculean entity that's become almost too massive and overbearing to actually serve the needs of communities. And I've actually seen support from left-leaning public elected officials to even consider breaking up RTD into smaller, more manageable entities. And we have that spirit in Colorado with our home rule charter status, where most municipalities are able to self-govern with very little input from the state. And what we've also seen is, I'm sorry, I just lost my train of thought there.
Well, you were talking about home rule, and that folks who are not part of that grid, they're not plugged into the matrix, if you will, the RTD matrix, are able to actually innovate and provide perhaps more effective, lower cost transportation directly serving only their community. So it begs the big question: what initiatives are you using to advance your cause to the voters and simultaneously try to invigorate or raise from the dead, if you will, this monstrosity?
In a lot of ways, the COVID-19 pandemic has been essentially, in a disturbing sort of way, almost essentially a bankruptcy filing for mass transit all across the country, because service routes have had to been cut back substantially, because not only are so very few people riding right now, but it's also not sustainable to travel to all these routes where people aren't getting picked up and people aren't going to. And in RTD, we've actually seen our schedule reduction cut back dramatically. But a good side to that is, one of the big reasons RTD has been in the problems it's been is because we haven't been able to hire enough CDL certified drivers. We've had drivers working mandatory 6-day work weeks for the better part of 4 years straight. And now that we've had the COVID-19 pandemic, we've actually been able to reduce the schedule for those drivers. They're still very much at risk, what with the pandemic levels still going at the rate they're going. But what we've been able to do is we've been able to cut back on the number of hours that drivers are mandated to work. We've been able to reduce how many places RTD has had to go to, and we've been able to essentially give ourselves a reset button. So once recovery efforts start happening, we can use what we had to do to return in a more sustainable fashion. Some routes may not have to be serviced immediately because there's still not much demand for them. Like, for example, a lot of the public schools use RTD systems. And right now, with public schools in Colorado not scheduled to open up for at least the foreseeable future, those can be one of those routes that we say, we don't have to quite get back to that yet. Let's go ahead and stick with the footprint we've got. Let's make sure we're getting buses on time to those stops. And once buses are on time and riders can actually keep track of and meaningfully track when the next bus is going to arrive, that's going to improve the service for them. And when the service improves, you get riders getting back on. And the more riders you get back into RTD, the more people who are putting fares into the system. And when you do that, you can create a model that's less dependent upon sales tax revenue, which is also had a wrecking ball taken to it, figuratively speaking, because most businesses have been labeled non-essential. And you can get more to that model of, let's make this a customer service oriented system that relies more on good commerce and sound business practices, rather than having to wait for the federal government or the state government to pick up the slack. Because right now we don't have those entities available to us. RTD got maybe a $232 million bailout, and we can't go to the feds every time a crisis happens. So when you have a crisis and you get that hard reset, like what COVID-19 gave us, you basically give us a metaphorical bankruptcy to restructure and get in a better position to deal with these issues in the future.
Is there an appetite? And what happens so very often at the municipal level is that you've got entrenched interests, and for economic reasons, for cronyist reasons, if in fact a particular large business happens to be at a stop in a mass transportation district, very often that's kept because that's literally the lifeline to their business. Is there the appetite, do you feel, and perhaps maybe it's beginning to evolve, for that type of restructuring, that type of radical restructuring? And is there an opportunity there perhaps to use this as a mechanism to introduce free market, for-profit, competitive models into the marketplace. Any appetite at all?
Absolutely. I think we were starting to see some appetite develop slightly before the COVID-19 pandemic really hit the fan in Colorado. Prior to the pandemic taking effect and shutdowns going into effect, one of the big discussions about where does RTD have to reduce their operations was the famous or infamous, depending on who you speak to, Broncos ride. Basically, it was a weekend where RTD basically committed priority resources, committed most of the drivers and most of its services to moving fans to Broncos games. There would be designated pickup sites, and people would get brought to Mile High Stadium to basically go to the Broncos game and things of that nature. But what some of the directors were pointing out, and one director in particular, Natalie Menton, was pointing out, was that with the shortage of drivers that RTD has, which again contributed to mandatory 6-day work weeks that just tanked morale, tanked retention, and made it nearly impossible to recruit more drivers. We had well over 100 plus drivers dedicated to this Broncos ride that ridership statistics have shown was almost non-existent. The numbers were extremely small and borderline did not justify. Actually, no, they absolutely did not justify the amount of drivers that were dedicated to this service. So one of the proposals was to basically phase out the Broncos ride system. RTD had already done that for things such as baseball games, for University of Colorado football games up in Boulder. They've done similar stuff in the past. So the idea of redirecting efforts away from the Broncos ride and towards more general service was absolutely starting to get pushed. And now that games have stopped entirely because of the COVID-19 pandemic and because people are generally not riding as much because of the pandemic, that's given us an opportunity to state, well, we've been without it for a while. And once we start to get back to what we were used to, normal isn't quite exactly when we're going to get back to just yet. But now that we've had this hard reset option, we can take a honest and genuine look at what's been effective and what hasn't. And if it hasn't been effective, absolutely turn that over to other entities. I believe that we should definitely make the case to the Denver Broncos themselves. You're a multi-billion-dollar organization. We love to help you, but we also can't dedicate hundreds of drivers to a service that's barely used when we're hurting across the board for drivers.
Right. Well, I'm thoroughly be impressed by the incredible level of detail that you've invested in your candidacy. It's clear that you have near encyclopedic knowledge of that which you want to become part of. And in attempting to introduce free market solutions or attempting to find efficiencies or attempting to drive down prices so that it becomes a business that's truly supportive of the community, that type of preparation is necessary. I got to ask, we just have a couple minutes left, but and then we'll bring you back. You are a libertarian, thoroughly, and just in the conversations we've had. What was that moment in your life when that light bulb went off that said, you know what, I'm going to join the Libertarian Party. I'm going to be an activist. I'm going to run for public office, and I'm going to take the initiative, and I'm going to be an innovator. I'm going to be a disruptor. What was that moment? When did that happen?
Well, it all absolutely happened in stages. The moment when I realized I was a libertarian was a little bit after the 2012 presidential election. I was deployed to Afghanistan at the time as a member of the Army. I was in Afghanistan for a number of months. I had come back from Afghanistan, and my experience over there showed me that we've been partnered with just a really horrendous government over there. It was, people think corruption in the United States is bad. Corruption in Afghanistan makes what we have look like a cakewalk. And it was during the presidential election. I got my mail-in ballot because that's what you do when you're in the military. You get your absentee ballot in the mail and you send it back in. I was looking at my presidential choices and I figured I got to vote for the lesser of two evils. I have to do it to stop what I perceive to be the greater problem. So I went up to my cabinet above the fridge in my barracks room, opened it up. It was my liquor cabinet. I pulled out a bottle of Jack Daniels, poured myself a shot, took the shot, and then had to mark my ballot. And the day after I did that, I registered Libertarian because I said, I'm never, ever going to vote that way ever again in my life for as long as I live.
Well, that's simply outstanding. You know, there were a couple of questions that were thrown up on screen that we didn't get a chance to. I'll ask Dan if he can leave them up there, so perhaps you can answer them. Some really good stuff. Oh, Alan Scott, quickly, how much are Colorado developers still getting kickbacks for transit, as W would say, orientated development projects? Lots of corruption there. That's a great question.
Oh, man. I've heard, I only have cursory knowledge from what I've heard from speaking with other directors, but there's a lot of entities that are heavily invested in RTD projects that have frankly just simply not been delivered upon. RTD has promised several projects to several entities and several municipalities, and RTD has come short on those exponentially. So we're looking at the point where we got to take a look at some of these deals. And if these are projects that simply can't happen and won't happen, we need to look at possibly getting people some of their money back, because that's what you do when you can't deliver on your promise. You give people their money back.
Excellent. Listen, we've got a minute or two left. Engage in some what we call here shameless self-promotion. Where can folks find you, find out more about your candidacy, and of course, if they are so driven, even in these challenging times, to perhaps contribute?
Absolutely. Well, if you are definitely in a position to give, I can certainly use the support, because small dollar donations have helped me in campaigns in the past, and they certainly help me now. And I'm not joking when I say anywhere from $3 to $5 can help, because those really start to add up. I like to tell people I run on change, and I run on change. And if you want to support my campaign financially, you can hit me up at mulder4rtd.com/support-ERIC. I'm also on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at mulder4rtd.com. And what you're helping me out when you give a contribution to my campaign is you're helping me not only pay for campaign signs, stickers, literature, things of that nature, you're also helping me to pay for advertisements. You're helping me to pay for those online ads, which we're going to rely on those a lot this year, because traditional campaign avenues, if they're not outright canceled, they're going to be reduced in a great capacity, and people are probably going to be very hesitant to get back to that sort of thing. So campaigning online and doing interviews, that is absolutely going to be the bulk of where our campaign expenses are going to be going into. So helping us to maintain that online presence is absolutely going to be the key in this election. So MULDER4RTD. You can .com that. I'm on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and I appreciate whatever support you can give me right now, especially in a time like this.
Eric, congratulations. A wonderful effort, well conceived, thoroughly well executed. And really, it's what's astonishing about this show so far has been to see just how sophisticated effort is being run by so many quote unquote down ballot candidates. And that's critically important for us to express at this moment of challenge in our party, because it bodes so well for the future. I'm going to put this out there, and Dan and I have agreed to put a couple names in an envelope and open them up in 10 years. I am convinced that one of the folks that we talk to, one of the young men and ladies, some of us who are perhaps a little bit more experienced in life, one of them will be a candidate for the presidency for the Libertarian Party in 10 years. You are looking and listening, you are watching, and hopefully you are embracing the bench that so many folks have talked about. And so many folks are desiring. There are great things happening in this party right now. Joining me next, and to express the diversity of candidacies that we have, there's here on LPTV. And of course, LPTV is an effort by the Libertarian Party to bring candidates, issues, forums to the fore in the emerging field of independent and digital media. Again, a big thanks to Dan Fishman, who's the executive director of the LP and also our executive producer. And of course, Nick Sarwak, who got this whole effort going. Joining us now from the great state of Ohio is Dr. Michael Fricke. He is running for Ohio's 13th congressional district. He is in what's called the Mahoning Valley. And we're going to talk about that, but I'd be remiss if I didn't bring up the fact that this is actually a very special day in the history of Ohio. First of all, Dr. Fricke, welcome to the show. We're thrilled to have you on board, but maybe just start out and give us a minute or two insight to what today represents to Ohio.
What I mentioned is actually Friday is the 50th anniversary of the Kent State massacre, and sadly, all of the memorials and tributes have been canceled because of the virus.
Right. What does that represent in terms of an event? And that's got to be
it's a seminal event. You don't have troops coming onto college campuses to suppress free speech. It's one of my areas where I've really looked into what happened back there, and it was a bunch of people who were upset with burning children in Vietnam and dropping bombs on villages, and exactly. The National Guard came in. There was provocations on both sides, and there was a ROTC building that was burned down. There was arson. Tensions were running high. The National Guard was called in by the city, not the university. But the National Guard went on the university, and what started the gunfire is hotly debated. There is maybe there was a gunshot a few blocks away, but then the troops opened fire, and 4 students or visitors to campus were killed. Mm-hmm. And this is a seminal event in American history. It's been 50 years since this happened, and there has not been anything similar other than things that were happening in that day. It really defined the right for students to peacefully protest.
Mm-hmm. Which, fortunately, regardless of your political affiliation, they have the ability to do today.
Yes. May the 4th. It's Thursday. It's May the 4th.
Okay. Tell us about briefly, before we get into your campaign, about your libertarian journey. What, when did it begin? What was there a triggering event, as they say? Was there a moment in time when that proverbial light bulb went up over your head?
1992, I was a freshman at Ohio State, and I, had to vote for the first time. And, I really looked into it. I was a political science major, double majored in chemistry. And I looked into Bush, I looked into Clinton, and I didn't like either one of them. I ended up voting for Ross Perot that year, but that really set off a journey to find my community. Mm-hmm. And I became active with the libertarian community during Gary Johnson's candidacy in 2016. Joined the Ohio Libertarian Party. I'm now on the executive at large. I'm the Ohio State Convention Conference Chair. And we fought, I think it took 103,000 signatures in 2017 to get on the ballot as a party, right, which hasn't happened in 15 years. And we are on the ballot, and we needed people to run. And I said, okay, it's my time. I live in a district which is gerrymandered as a Democratic district. Tim Ryan is the representative currently. He's a powerful Democrat. That's fine. We're going to speak our truth to him. And he's really, been in Washington so long that he's out of touch with the Mahoning Valley and what needs to happen here.
When we have these conversations with candidates, there's sort of a pre-COVID, now during COVID element to it, if you will. There are the issues that folks who are concerned with now, and now, of course, particularly folks who are running for federal office, as you are, there's this overarching frustration, if you will, with so much of the chaos that's happening between states and the federal government, the miscommunication, the bureaucracies, the growing tentacles of the federal government have taken up so much of the space, so many of challenges, if you will, and have done so poorly in so many respects that it has taken all the oxygen out of the room, as they say, for the free market to respond. So let's talk pre-COVID for a second. Ohio 13th, and as a graduate of the Ohio State University, what were the pressing challenges for folks in that district?
Well, if you asked me what was the most important thing, 6 months ago, I would have said jobs, and that has only become more important to people in my district. We've had a lot of shutdowns. The price of oil is to the point where we can't do fracking of our shale. We have hospitals laying off people because no one wants to go to their regular checkups. It's just been a complete disaster for an area that was already depressed.
Right. And to that point, folks often talk about the pre-COVID boom cycle as being something of a jobless recovery. Unless you worked in investment banking, or ironically, if you chose a career in government, there were a lot of industries that suffered. In Ohio, you've got plants like, I believe, Lordsville and places like that for the large car companies that were being, I use the quotation marks here on LPTV, they were being repurposed. That's a nice way of saying shut down for the most part. So it was largely a jobless recovery. What do you think, from a libertarian perspective, should be government's approach to addressing that?
Well, government's been a big part of the problem in depressing this area. GM came in 50 years ago. They set up Lordstown plant, which has employed tens of thousands of people in the last 50 years. They set it up in the middle of nowhere. Lordstown Village grew around it. And part of the problem is that car manufacturers are required to build cars where the average meets a certain fuel efficiency. And what ends up happening is that car manufacturers are forced to build cars that no one wants to buy. Another problem we have with our manufacturing here is just rampant taxing. We had some Democratic mayors like Dennis Kucinich in Cleveland who drove Caterpillar out of the area by just making it uncompetitive to manufacture here. And then there are things that are. I worked at a pharmaceutical plant in Bedford, Ohio, that employed 1,300 people, and we made injectable generic pharmaceuticals. So when people ask me, why does a vial of insulin cost $700 when a few years ago it was less than $100, and the answer is that we've regulated out the generic manufacturing industry, and that opportunists have come in and can charge whatever they want because no one else is able to produce it. So I was at this factory in 2014 when it became unprofitable. They had some quality violations with the FDA, and 1,300 people were laid off, including myself. And this is beyond pharmaceuticals, beyond car manufacturing. This has repeated itself in the Mahoning Valley, ever since the steel mills shut down.
Right. Here's the ironic part. For communities like the Mahoning Valley, tariffs were a tool by government, allegedly, to support you and bring jobs back to you. Have you seen any of those alleged benefits in terms of the rebirth, if you will, of the Rust Belt manufacturing?
So I'm going to point out America Makes, which is a public-private partnership. It brought $85 million in investment to Youngstown in 2012. Mm-hmm. And it has invested in STEM education. We're now an additive manufacturing hub. And I think these kind of things are really good. So we have Buffalo and Pittsburgh, which are both now high-tech hubs. And I think this is really the answer for bringing the Mahoning Valley back, is encouraging this type of development. We have all kinds of low-paying jobs. Amazon has a couple centers in Cleveland and Akron. But really, it's the high-tech manufacturing that's going to bring the good jobs back to the Mahoning Valley.
Should American trade policy then simply be to get out of the way and to allow the winner, if you will, the person, the firm, the company, the effort, the innovation, the disruption that comes out with the best low cost product? Or do you see continual attempts by government to structure their way into a solution? Which way should we go?
So I'm not going to say that government is always going to cause problems with building business and improving the economy. Really, they don't have much control over the economy. Their only ability is to facilitate innovation or to hinder innovation. And I think that not just our local leaders, but the leaders in federal government have failed completely at this. And really, they do need to get out of our way. Now, there are examples where the federal government really is the only way to provide innovation. My favorite one is always antibiotics. The private market is never going to make new antibiotics because if they are successful in creating a new drug, they'll never make their money back because new classes of antibiotics will only be given to very, very few, very, very sick people. And this is where research grants and the federal government does have a role. So I'm not the type of libertarian who says that, we need to get rid of the federal government. I definitely see a point in having them. Preparing for a pandemic is another function of federal government, which they have also failed completely at. And anyone who's an incumbent who says that they have solutions now really should have had those solutions, like my opponent when he joined Congress 17 years ago.
There's three areas of, and particularly since you come from that background where both our approach to medicine and the FDA have I think, been miserable failures. One, of course, is the continued reliance on something called certificate of needs. Another one, of course, is the ability to license, cross-license, and allow and encourage cross-licensing across state borders. And then third, of course, is the FDA being seemingly more intent until very recently on preventing lawsuits than they are on greenlighting new pharmaceutical developments. I mean, am I right there? I'm sure for someone who, like yourself, who works in or has worked in the industry, the actual answer is far more nuanced. What are your thoughts on those subjects, particularly since you're competing to be a member of Congress with direct oversight over some of these agencies?
Well, I definitely see a big role for the FDA, not just in regulatory, but in investigating. They came to a pretty quick conclusion on what was causing the vaping illness in 2019. And full disclosure, I came from a family where my dad was a big shot in the FDA, and he's listening to me now. So I'm not going to say anything bad about the FDA, particularly because I work in an industry that is regulated by the FDA. I'm a drug development chemist full time. I'm working on a few COVID drugs actually right now, and it's been a great career. And I do believe that this is an industry that should be regulated, and you really can't blame the FDA for not allowing, for instance, drug importation. This is not the FDA's decision. This is the decision of Health and Human Services.
So with that in mind, where have we erred in terms of drug importation or creating more competitive markets within the United States? Because there was actually 3 different initiatives last year from 3 different political sources. One of them, of course, was the Bernie movement. The other one, ironically, had to do with, I guess, is it Senator Rick Scott from Florida, who was advocating for price fixing, which, as a fan of economics, I wouldn't call myself a student of economics, I've always found price fixing to be destructive of markets. It creates shortages. It does not provide inducements for new drug development on a fundamental economic basis. What should they have done differently, or what could they do differently moving forward? Let's look at it from a positive perspective.
So one thing that they've done is allowed generic manufacturers to bring the price of drugs down after the innovators are able to recover their research costs. And American pharmaceutical research is the best in the world. Unfortunately, we've lost our manufacturing in this country. There is very, very limited active ingredient manufacturing in this country, and there's also very limited drug product manufacturing in this country. And I think that the government is a hindrance in this industry.
Does Right to Try, now, if for folks not familiar with the Right to Try movement, it's literally that. It was developed first at the state level under the auspices of organizations like the Goldwater Institute, where you had literally the deathbed case, and there was a potential treatment. And state by state, finally, at the federal level, Right to Try was authorized so that there was a set approach via the FDA towards affording folks who are so seriously ill the opportunity to try new treatments. It's been slow in its adaptation at some levels. Did you support Right to Try, and do you think that's an important innovation?
I don't think anyone is against Right to Try. If anything, the only thing that's holding it up is just the slow bureaucracy of big government. But I don't think there's an opponent that's trying to prevent Right to Try.
It's interesting. Out of the 50 states, the Rhode Island, where I'm so proudly hail from, was one of the last states and actually never approved it at the state level. It took the federal government signed by Donald Trump to actually finally authorize Right to Try federally, where we now have an option to, if you will, take this wonderful development and save our lives. Go figure. So yeah, there were a few people who were a little stalwarts. We've got a couple minutes left, so let's move on to some other issues. What other issues? Again, looking at federal issues through a libertarian prism, if you will, through the lens of a libertarian, what other issues do you think resonate with folks in Ohio?
So I've been surveying the constituents in my district, and one of the things that they've brought up over and over and again is corruption of public officials. They go to Washington and they forget about where they're from, and make a lot of money, and it's I think there's a real movement towards having grassroots candidates replace longtime incumbents who have done nothing else with their career except be politicians. And one of the problems in accomplishing this is Ohio is extremely gerrymandered. The Republicans in Columbus have set up 12 congressional districts that are safely Republican and 4 congressional districts that are safely Democrat. And you showed the map of my district earlier, and it starts on the border of Pennsylvania, farmland, goes through manufacturing towns like Warren and Youngstown, and then through Kent, which is a college town, and then kind of splits into a fork, goes up into Cuyahoga Falls and down into Akron. If you look in the real granular map, they've gone so far as to, draw squares around houses. I mean, these are people that have spent millions of dollars to make sure that certain districts stay either with the Democrats or with the Republicans. And in this case, we have one of the most powerful Democrats in the House of Representatives who hasn't had a serious challenge in years, and there's no reason for him to even come home until it's election season, and then that's the photo op with the Mahoney Mudheads, who is a minor league baseball team that may get shut down. He's all over the place now. So.
Corruption in the form of crony capitalism.
Exactly.
Excuse me. Is very often, for libertarians, one of the great issues that they can tackle.
If you look at the success stories in my district, it's really all come from private individuals. Like LeBron James has started a I Promise school in Akron, which is geared towards kids that are falling behind. He's paid for it completely out of his own pocket. It's a wonderful example, and they have a great STEM program. That's something that I've been involved with through the American Chemical Society, is outreach and getting kids excited about science. And I think this is what we need more of in our district. And one other issue while we're on the topic of the district is in Ohio. A lot of people are concerned about cannabis. Ohio is now a medical state, but is not a recreational state. And there's been a groundswell of petition drives at the city and county level. And slowly the cities and counties are decriminalizing. And this has been a problem this year in particular, because you can't do petition drives because of the virus. But another unusual thing about Ohio is that since August, hemp has been legal in Ohio, and the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation was not able to tell the difference between hemp and cannabis.
Right.
So hemp has essentially been, as long as you tell the officer that you have hemp in the car, they weren't able to prosecute you until just a few weeks ago. David Yost, the Ohio Attorney General, announced that yes, after almost 8 months, Ohio is now able to tell the difference between hemp and cannabis.
Excellent. But and this brings up an interesting point. Clearly, as someone serving at the congressional level, you've got the opportunity to inject yourself, for lack of a better term, into American drug policy. Do you support, if you will, the legalization of all drugs? And do you believe that if, number one, by descheduling cannabis from the DEA, and number two, ending the war, this oppressive civil liberty nightmare called the war on drugs, which has cost our nation billions, is it time for that to end?
I believe in the Portugal model, which is to take the legal issues out of the whole mess and make it a medical issue. And Portugal has had success with this for a decade, where they've had drug addiction dropping, they've had a reduction in homelessness, and a lot of these hard drugs that are causing people to overdose. And opioid addiction is running rampant in the Mahoning Valley. That's the drug of choice around here. But you can live a productive life on a medically maintained heroin addiction. You can, in British Columbia, you're able to have heroin through a pharmacy, and people are able to live productive lives while they work out their addictions.
Right.
But another big point about the drug war is people want to talk about immigration. We need to build the wall. What really needs to happen is the drug war needs to end so that the civil wars in Central America can end.
Right.
And once that happens, people won't need to escape, a war field. And when they're immigrating, they're really refugees from our drug war.
Right. Absolutely. We are, the line I like to use is that we have effectively offshored our drug production into Central and Latin America, as opposed to, say, during the days of the Volstead Act, when, liquor was made in maybe Canada, but all over the United States. Now we've offshored it, and we're shocked at the violence, the recriminations, the health crises, the legal crises, the sheer amount of death and violence that's occurred. And we're even more shocked, if you will, when folks flee that oppression through our southern border and put additional pressure on our southern cities. I'm an open borders guy. Yeah, there, I said it. I just don't see the utility anymore of arbitrarily drawn lines in literally the sand from 100 or 150 years or 200 years ago. They don't reflect today's realities, and they don't reflect the potential that so many people have lost because of this type of impact. So I think you're spot on there. Tell us a little bit about how you plan on campaigning during COVID. I mean, it's a challenge for everyone. What your thoughts are there?
So I'm slowly building a ground operation. I have a campaign manager. I have a treasurer, and we are gearing up. But my original thought was to drive Lyft around my district and meet people, and it was working for a while because I would pick them up and they would talk to me for a minute. Some of them would live stream, and I'd be able to take questions from their friends, and it was really a great strategy to meet the people in my district without actually spending a whole lot of money.
Right.
But of course, I can't do that right now. I haven't picked up a passenger since January. So it's going to be all online podcasts and interviews like this. And I do have a pretty good social media game where we are on different community Facebook pages, engaging with the community.
Excellent. Well, now I know your website is in process, but we want to bring Eric back on in a second or two.
Yeah.
But we love to say, Dr. Fricke, let's engage in some shameless self-promotion. Tell folks where they can find you on social media right now.
Sure. I'm on Facebook, Fricke for Ohio 13, Mike Fricke 2020. I'm also the social media coordinator for the Portage County Libertarian page. Mm-hmm. I'm in the Ohio Libertarian Party executive at-large committee member. I'm promoting the Ohio Libertarian State Convention, which will happen in July after the Nationals, which is our biannual business meeting.
Right.
I'm also the chair of the American Chemical Society of the Akron section, so I definitely want to promote the chemists and the outreach with the STEM.
Volunteering is the mother's milk of the libertarian movement. Yeah. If we seek to replace government, we need to be right on the cutting edge, the bleeding edge, if you will, of showing that citizen involvement can, in fact, replace government. So congratulations on that. We've got Eric back, I think. Yep. So let's chat for the couple of minutes that we have left. You both listen to each other. It's kind of unfair, but we'll do it anyway. Eric, do you have any suggestions for the doctor? And then the doctor, what are your thoughts about Eric's efforts?
Well, I was blown away with how much knowledge Eric brings to his office that he's seeking. And anyone who talks to him is going to instantly want to vote for him. So congratulations, Eric.
I think it's phenomenal that we have people with your level of education, Dr. Fricke, speaking and running in the Libertarian Party. And your knowledge of federal workings is absolutely outstanding. I don't know too many people who have an understanding of the federal government the way you explained it. It's absolutely refreshing to hear such a perspective I don't get to hear very often in the LP.
Yeah, thanks, Eric.
No, and again, I want to point out in closing tonight why we have so much to be optimistic about. We have so much to look forward as candidates. I'd like to put out there tonight the notion, and this will be a work in progress, if tonight's candidates or any libertarian candidate anywhere is running into difficulties as we emerge into the digital debate season, participating, getting your opportunity to shine, your moment, your libertarian moment, and your ability to challenge the duopoly firsthand by both of your skill sets, you need to let us know.
Absolutely.
It's incumbent upon us as libertarians nationwide. And one of the central purposes of this show is to make aware folks in Maryland, for example, about great candidates tonight in Colorado and Ohio. And next week, perhaps a gentleman from Florida and perhaps someone from Pennsylvania. Make them known well to affiliates in Washington. Let's bring together nationally and recognize nationally, share tips, expertise, experience sets nationally, the efforts of our quote unquote down ballot candidates, because it is my contention, as important as this presidential election is, and everyone is. And as much as it affords us a nationwide bully pulpit to express our views, to talk to people about our all-important platform, to explain the statement of principles, as important as it is, I will argue to you that the two gentlemen who joined us today, as well as the half a dozen other candidates who joined us in the preceding weeks, have, through their contention, their race, and hopefully their victories in these quote-unquote down-ballot candidates, have more of an impact on individual lives of everyday Americans than perhaps the most impressive presidential campaign, because it is at the root of the local communities with which our lessons, our liberty, our message of libertarianism and freedom and self-ownership and body autonomy has so much to impart to people in local communities. And again, these are folks who have once given the experience of being quote unquote, I use the term very loosely, governed by libertarians. That is how we will grow this movement. And that, as we like to say, is how we will take over the highest reins of government so we can leave everybody alone. Gentlemen, congratulations on your efforts. Again, every week I continue to be astonished by exactly what individuals like you are accomplishing. As always, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us. An Hour with the Candidates. If in fact we have a Facebook page, we'd love to have you like it, share it, post on it. If candidates from anywhere in the country at any level are looking to participate in this, please reach out to us there. You can also reach out to me, Pat Ford. I'm all over the Facebook, all over social media. Reach out to us so that we can schedule you. We can expand the opportunities for individuals like this and individuals like you to participate on a nationwide level with your brother and sister libertarians. Thank you so much for joining us. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.